Hello everybody, welcome back to Language, Litigation, and Integration Part 98, the USSR. Going to be giving you, like I said, I was going to do a new history season or series, but this includes history as well, so I'm just going to keep it as is. I'm not going to know how much, like I said, I'll do it for a lot of other countries as well, or just history that's relevant. But we'll be reviewing the relevant history of the USSR, we'll be learning some Russian words, and then I'll be responding to Patrick Bet-David's interview with John Perkins, PBD podcast number 125, The Economic Hitman. Now, the podcast isn't super relevant to the USSR, but it is relevant to economic policy and political ideology, so I figured that'd be a good talking point to end this one up. Really, this is just me writing in my own words the history of the USSR on Wikipedia. But again, like I said, I've well learned and read extensively in world history. So really, most of this is just a refresher to me. Again, I've been through the main pieces of world history. Can't tell you every battle, any war, but I've been through the major points of all history, like educating myself probably 3 or 4 or 5 times now. So certainly something I can talk about. Again, history is one of my favorite subjects or research areas now, but that's really what we'll be doing. So first, Soviet. If you want to pronounce that in English, and again, my Cyrillic is not great. My pronunciation, of any sound is good, but with the Cyrillic letters, I just haven't practiced enough to. So if I butcher some pronunciation, pretty confident on this one. Soviet, Glasnost, and Perestroika. And Glasnost is really the Glasnost with the O in there, that throws me off a little bit, so I'm not exactly sure. But we'll cover those words when we get to the history. So what does Soviet mean? It means advice, then counsel. And counsel, dictionary definition, counsel, C-O-U-N-S-E-L, not council, C-O-U-N-C-I-L. Now, a union would be more of a council, I-L, like a total a working body, whereas counsel is more of an advice or a lawyer or a given piece of information. So you have the Soviet Union existed from 1922 to 1991, and it stands for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It was governed by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and Moscow was the capital, and it's the largest, most populous republic. Other major urban centers included Leningrad, Russia, Kiev, Ukraine, Minsk, Belarusian, which is interesting. They literally, historically, they said Belarus, they spell it B-Y-E-L-O, Russian. And so I'm assuming that the Bie, that's like the B with like the little L after it in the Cyrillic alphabet. I thought it was interesting. That's Belarusian, Russian, Belarus. Tashkent, Uzbekistan, Alma-Ata, Kazakhstan, I'm assuming, and Novosibirsk, Russia. So those were like the major economic urban centers. The union commenced in 1917 after Vladimir Lenin overthrew the provisional government that had earlier replaced the House of Romanov of the Russian Empire and formed the first constitutional socialist state in the world. For relevant time frames, World War I was July 14th to November 18, November 1918, July 1914 to November 1918. So it's really kind of at the end of World War I. Had the first socialist constitution in the world. The tensions led to a civil war between the Bolshevik Red Army versus the White Guard, known as the White Terror. For reference, McCarthyism, the Red Scare, and anyone's taken American history, that wasn't until 1950. There's more accusations of infiltration of Soviets into the American way of life. Red Terror were executions carried out through the Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police, from 1918 to 1922. Which was modeled after the Reign of Terror from the French Revolution. I'll do another segment on the French Revolution. The Bolsheviks were successful in 1922, and the Bolsheviks are headed by Lenin, Again, Lenin's ideology was really based in Karl Marx. Karl Marx was 1818 to 1860. Again, that's not like me remembering a bunch of dates. I just studied all this stuff like the past 2 days. But, so it's a good 100 years. Again, I don't know when he published his books. The 2 books Karl Marx published, Manifesto der Kommunistischen Partei, sorry if I just slaughtered all of the pronunciation. That's your Communist Manifesto, and Das Kapital. I'm assuming that's a German dude. But, again, really laying out socialism versus communism. We've talked about that. Again, my working definition is communism, both state-owned properties, but communism is much more of a leader, where socialism is more general, just to shared property. So, sorry, my notes are all over the place on this point, or on this episode. But once the Bolsheviks were successful in 1922, they unified the Russian, Transcaucasian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian republics. Lenin introduced new economic policy which allowed for some free markets and private property, allowing for economic recovery because of the war. Stalin replaced Lenin after he died in 1924. Stalin implemented a command economy, which it differs from a planned command versus planned. It's kind of the dichotomy you get historically. And Marx was more of a decentralized planner for the basis of a socialist state. Again, they take the idea of socialist, and now how do we form a political, or we all should share property, we all should be equal, we all should have this. Now how do we implement that? That's where the political structure comes from. So a command economy differed substantially from Marx's decentralized planning of the economy, just for free thought, which expanded Stalin's implementation, expanded industrialization, collectivism, and economic growth, and also made a man-made famine from 1932 to 1933. He expanded gulags, which are forced labor camps, which were introduced by Lenin, and executed the Great Purge, just killing anybody or putting them in gulags or executing anybody from military officials to citizens that were against his political ideology. So now, again, for time reference, World War II went from 1939 to 1945, and the major Axis powers were Nazi Germany, the Kingdom of Italy, and the Empire of Japan, and then plus, plus, plus. Again, I'll probably do a whole section on World War II, but, you know, before or after Pearl Harbor, when did this country join, when did that country join? There's a bunch of supporting actors on both sides. It's more allies than Axis, but a lot on both. But had to pause here for another great Ben Shapiro quote from yesterday. Again, one of his videos, he said, he's talking about the West ideals, the good free market economy, and he literally goes, the West like it. He's about to say Italy, and he's like, oh yeah, no. The Axis powers, Mussolini was definitely not with the Western ideals, Ben. So, good job, buddy. I got you. I didn't miss that. But those Mussolini and Italy were certainly not part of the Allies. So I don't know which World War II you read about, Ben. But keep trying, buddy. I believe in you. But the USSR signed a non-aggression pact with Germany on August 23rd, 1939, after failing to form an alliance with the West. So again, a lot in our current Russian-Ukrainian tensions, the United States and all the Western states need to realize that the USSR took most of the casualties and fought with the Allies. So that's really historically like why, I'm assuming why Putin is very against Ukraine joining NATO. And we'll get there. Soviets began annexing Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia after being formally neutral. They were not on either side, but then they invaded. Germans invaded Russia in June 1941. Soviets accounted for most of the deaths of the Allies and captured Berlin, winning the war on May 9, 1945. The territories captured by the Soviets became the Eastern Bloc, which confronted the Western Bloc, territories accumulated by Britain. The Allies were the UK, Soviet Union, US, and a bunch of others. The Western Bloc being the US territories, which resulted in the North Atlantic Trade Organization, NATO, in 1949. So that's my guess, is this is the biggest reason, you know, Russia and USSR take most of the fucking deaths from World War II, and then the for whatever reason, we're not on great terms with Putin or with Russia, so we're going to add Ukraine. So historically, I can see why this is a big no-no. I mean, that's respectable. Again, always for human rights, but the Western countries need to be a little more understanding. Stalin died in 1953. Nikita Khrushchev led de-Stalinization, known as the Khrushchev Thaw. This led to rapid economic development. In the mid-80s, Gorbachev implemented, and sorry for fucking up the pronunciation, glasnost, something like that, but glasnost with an O after the N and before the S. But if you Google it, it'll say openness. Literally, linguistically, it's more structured like public itty, like not even publicity, but it's like public e, like public, open, out in the public. It's really more to publicity, public e, than even to openness. Glasnost means to say, read, run, and it literally, again, it's not, glasnost isn't what he called it, glasnost or glasnost or nost. Whenever they put the O in there, that's when it really means like the publicity. But the root word literally means to say, read, run. And really, for reforming the judiciary and perestroika, which this one translated pretty literally to rebuilding, then reconstruction, more so the verb form than the noun, reconstruction, that's a noun, rebuilding, reconstructing would produce reconstruction, but most literally rebuilding. And those were introduced to boost the economy while preserving the Communist Party. The Cold War ended in 1991 during his rule, 2 years after the Warsaw Pact of 1989 was signed, where Marxist-Leninist regimes were overthrown in forming republics. Gorbachev introduced a referendum to try and restore the Union under a new federation. A coup was attempted in August 1991 against Russian President Boris Yeltsin and failed. This resulted in banning the Communist Party. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned and the Associated States emerged as republics. So that's really my abridged version, in my words, of recent and local relevant history for the USSR, and hopefully to give some people, at least in America or other countries that aren't super well-read in history, this is really probably where like the Ukrainian being one of the first part of the Soviet Union, annexation, that's probably really where this is coming from. And additionally why Putin does not want Ukraine added to NATO. So that's really it for my overview of the USSR. Everyone should be more reasonable. Vlad, please do not invade. I forget the word, I typed it on the LinkedIn. And I forget the invasion word. So don't do the invasions. I don't know why we're doing invasions. But again, everyone should just be more reasonable. Who fucking knows? Alright, now responding to a podcast. So now responding to the PBD podcast number 125, The Economic Hitman, John Perkins, 2016. Well, he wrote a book in 2016. The interview was 2 days ago or 3 days ago, but I think his book, The Economic Hitman, was from the most recent edition, is 2016. And so right off the bat, the dude has a pretty interesting story. He was literally an economic hitman. He was basically, in most politically correct terms, he was Shylocking foreign governments, offering them exuberant loans that they can't repay back to boost American industrialization and make a bunch of money. He literally talks about, he goes, Shylocking for foreign dictators, like whole countries, anywhere we had oil or any of our own, like American economic interest. And he talks about the jackals, which are basically just assets of the CIA, just hitmen, which is fucking hilarious. Not really, but right, when you see Michael Franzese saying Sammy the Bull, what you guys were doing in New York, the United States, literally in the 80s and 70s, was doing this with literally countries. So it's kind of calm the kettle black on that one, US. Good job, guys. You get a lot of misinformation from translators, John Perkins, and he's really talking about like the benefits of speaking a native language. And again, it's all of this stuff. Just translate word for word. You get the gist of what they're saying a lot better if you know the language yourself. So I totally agree. Censorship and translation, like literally censoring your words. If you start speaking another language that you're not confident in, you'll lose, you know, what's that word? I can't remember it in this language. Whereas if you just speak one language, you'll just ramble on a bunch of nonsense. So that's really kind of interesting there. They say, what's the difference between an imperialist and a dictator? Historically, imperialism was more of colonization, but it's not much different than a dictator. I mean, you can have an imperialist society that is not a communist or socialist state. Imperialism is more about, you know, Christopher Columbus coming over, the Dutch, the Spanish, the Portuguese, imperializing South America, Central America, Africa. And a dictator is just more of a leader. Imperialist isn't really necessarily a political ideology, and more of a state of a country. It's like foreign diplomacy. The Shah did say he would ruin people's lives if they didn't agree with him. John Perkins, again, me, the leader of the nation state of Brad, I will ruin anyone's life who's ruined my life, and my life is currently ruined. Like the whole thing, like literally the whole thing. The recent history of Iran, they talk about 1960 to 1970 to today. Again, I'll probably do another section on that, just any portion of history that's interesting. But they just talk about it being very open, you know, girls in short skirts, but very much more progressive than any Western person would think of it today. And I don't know any history on the Shah or any Iranian history. Getting poisoned and removing 70% of his large intestine. He got poisoned for, again, he's doing the Shylocking for the United States government or United States corporation. He goes and says, you know, I'm done doing this. His boss is like, you know, you should probably stay, you want to stay. He's talking about writing a book, and then he meets with a journalist, and then he's in the hospital, and they had to remove 70% of his large intestine. So a very interesting story to get, before we even got into like the talking points on the podcast. But he got $500,000, which was like 1.6 million today. 500,000 in 1980, which equated to about 1.6 million in today's dollars, to not write the book, which I believe he accepted and then ended up writing it in complete secrecy, because at the time he was, you know, talking to other people who were involved in like clearly making it known that he was writing a book. So he says, and I quote, "I didn't want to believe what I was doing was wrong because I was living my American dream." And if that isn't the theme song and the anthem and the tagline for every single fucking American from 1970 to today. So yeah, again, we're all living our American dreams, and now we have our Controlled Substance Acts violating common law. We have terrible health. 94% of all medical research goes to drugs and devices, or 96, and 4% goes to preventative medicine. Yeah, as long as you're flying around on planes and your personal life's going forward, who cares? Then they start talking about the relationship, the financial relationship of the United States debt to China. Excuse me. Does the USA debt to China mean Americans are enslaved to China, or vice versa? No. Again, at this point, again, we're not in World War II. World War III is not going to fucking happen. We have technology since then. We have cell phones. During that period since 1945, or even fucking the Cold War, or even Vietnam, we all have cell phones now. That is the great mediator of everything. Not a government, not an individual. We all see each other's behaviors. We're like, oh yeah, we're all about the same. Probably shouldn't do dumb shit. But again, I don't see debt as enslavement even possible with the prevalence of technology. But just commingling of economies is overall a good thing. Debt, not so much in general, but again, debt at the country level or even at the business level is not very concerning to me. So it really just depends. But PBD and Adam Adam's his co-host. Those are the three on the podcast today. I don't know if Gerard went back to his home with the Florida Manatees, but I haven't seen him in a couple episodes. But they disagree about Chinese unemployment and available a free press. Basically, everyone's like, you know, China fudges numbers, does this, does that. I haven't done a deep dive to really look into that. But Perkins is more convincing, and PBD gets offended. Basically, Perkins is saying, you know, what data don't you think you can get? You can go study in China. You can go get And so again, with the interconnectedness of technology and of just growth in general, I don't see us fudging some numbers here or there. Extremely hiding stuff, even from the Chinese Communist Party. Again, look at Wuhan, when it's not that secret, and that's probably one of the bigger secrets. So I'm more on the Perkins side, but certainly without even doing my own research, he is more convincing in this part of the argument. Then they compare Marxism versus Stalinism. which is kind of an interesting thing, because Stalinism is typically compared to Leninism. Because both, again, Marx was, again, 100 years before the 1918 or whenever they hopped in the game, 1917. So Stalinism is typically compared with Marx, or with Leninism, Lenin being more of a socialist, Stalin being more of a communist. Marx wanted to raise the status of the workers, and Stalin repressed workers. Again, kind of just said that. Lenin was founding head of the government of Soviet Russia. Again, some redundancy here. Lenin ruled from 1917 to 1924. Stalin ruled the Soviet Union from 1924 to 1953. Again, Marx was 1818 to 1883. And then there's a couple other dudes in there besides Gorbachev that ruled for a year or two. Those were really the big ones. And then they say, what's the difference between oligarchy and capitalism? Perkins is arguing that, basically the United States is an oligarchy because of the tech giants. And PVD is always arguing the capitalism without much political or historical knowledge. PVD says capitalism is a game. No, life is not a game. Capitalism is a part of life, property, owning things because it's an extension of your time and your effort for your efficiency. Not a game. Perkins says the system is corrupt. What do I think? I don't agree with either of them. They basically compare, again, oligarchy is just more ruled by a couple, but major tech companies don't rule people. I don't think they manipulate people. I don't think raw capitalism, complete free choice is a good thing. No regulation whatsoever is certainly not a good thing. But I disagree with Perkins as being super corrupt. I disagree with PVD saying capitalism is a game. And then they talk about law passers versus lobbyists, and then I added versus the people. Who's more to blame for what is the great extent of the wealth in inequality? It's the people. It's not the person getting paid to go tell Congress to do something. It's not Congress people passing the laws. It's the sentiment of the people. The Congress people came from the sentiment of the people. I'm just watching Mike Gibbons. He's a Trump supporter, and it's just again mumbling off again like the three talking points of the people that subscribe to the Dark Horse podcast that are illiterate at the truckers' rally. So it's not a lot of thought there. It's the people. The sentiment has to change. It's the problem of everything: history, math, science, law, everything. So again, the sentiment really comes from the masses, and that's not the law passers or the lobbyists. So then we talk about the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, which we just covered. They had 15 members. I think 14 of them were socialist republics, and one was like a socialist federation or something a little different. Didn't write that down. But they talk about Trump and Russia. What is the potential of corruption in the age of technology? Again, some people would probably like it to happen. I just think it is very, very unlikely to happen, at least at scale or something substantial, or at least without people fucking noticing. So that was really the last of the talking points, but I thought it was a great response to, again, just structure of communism versus socialism, ideologies versus political structures versus economic policy. So that'll be it for today. No stories, no other talking points. But again, I'll be doing more of these. Again, I'll just keep it as this lecture series because this was meant to be historically and linguistic as well. So keep that there, and I hope you watched or enjoyed Language, Litigation, and Integration Part 98, the USSR. Thanks for watching.